This is Ottawa's castle, the Chateau Laurier. Join me for 3 unforgettable nights inside this architectural icon in our nation's capital, from one of the best culinary experiences I've had in my life to my absolute must-do activities in downtown Ottawa. The Chateau Laurier has been a cornerstone of Canadian history for over a century and even has an eerie tie to the Titanic and a ghost that has lived here ever since the night the ship sunk. This stay is unlike any other. This is the Chateau Laurier. Let's begin. Now, last summer, I started a series to visit Canada's Grand Railway hotels, built in an era when passenger trains ruled the Rockies, from the Banff Springs to the Chateau Lake Louise, Palliser in Calgary, Hotel Vancouver, the Fort Garry in my hometown of Winnipeg, the Royal York in Toronto, the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton, and probably my personal favorite, the Best Burrell in Saskatoon. Now, first off, this video is sponsored by Seed, and this episode is my tribute to one of Canada's most pivotal and grandest railway hotels. But to truly appreciate it, we need to rewind more than 2 centuries ago to tell that story from the start. The year 1812 saw the United States declare war on the British Empire, and an invasion from upstate New York would threaten control of the St. Lawrence River, which was then Canada's primary transportation artery. So in response, the British built a safer alternative to reach Montreal, the Rideau Canal, which was a 200-kilometer long man-made waterway taking 6 years to construct, and this engineering feat not only secured a new supply route, but also laid the groundwork for the Queen to later select Ottawa as the capital of Canada. Now, when you think of Canada's railways, you probably think of the Canadian Pacific completing their coast-to-coast transcontinental route here outside Revelstoke and Craigellachie, BC in November of 1885. And Ottawa was a major stop in their transcontinental route, with the Pacific Express, the first transcontinental passenger train, arriving here on June 28, 1886. But in 1896, led by their new president, Charles Melville Hayes, the Grand Trunk had to change of direction, and with newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier eager for more competition for the Canadian Pacific, 1903 saw the government agree to fund a second transcontinental railway with the Grand Trunk west in Winnipeg, which they would reach 3 years later in 1906, and then under the newly formed Grand Trunk Pacific Railway, they would forge west into Saskatoon by 1907, Edmonton by 1909, and heading west for the Northern Rockies in what we now know today as Jasper. And this was actually the original route the Canadian Pacific had surveyed and wanted to pass their route through to the Pacific. But Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald wanted to pass through the much steeper, more treacherous southern route through Banff and the Rogers Pass so that they could use the railway as a physical border from the US. And that's exactly what they did. And by 1911, the Grand Trunk Pacific would reach Jasper, and shortly after they'd reach the edge of the Pacific in Prince Rupert, with the last spike being driven home in Fort Fraser, about 150 kilometers west of Prince George, in April of 1914. Hayes and his vision had single-handedly drove the Grand Trunk Pacific towards his goal of putting the Canadian Pacific out of business, and he believed that Prince Rupert, being more than 48 hours closer to Asia than the Canadian Pacific were in Vancouver, would create a big draw for passengers and freight companies. Another huge component of his vision was also a route held together by a network of luxurious railway hotels. The Canadian Pacific had the Banff Springs and the Chateau Frontenac, but Hayes had plans to conquer them all, and the Chateau Laurier, well, that was his crown jewel to start. Construction began in 1909, just steps away from Parliament Hill, alongside the Rideau Canal, on not just a state-of-the-art hotel, but a new passenger station to service the hotel from across the street. Now, this process actually started in 1906, but for Hayes, this was about one-upping the competition, and he wasn't giving the Canadian Pacific an inch. From building his new hotel right beside the Canadian Pacific tracks, to quoting them exceptionally high rates when they wanted to use the station, since they were in need of a new station as well at the time. But after what I can only describe as a 3-year pissing contest, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier stepped in to have them both agree to use the new Grand Trunk station together, and any station you see across the world named Union Station was named that in honor of a union of the railways under one roof, or in this case, one train shed. The new hotel's design embraced French chateau style with an Indiana limestone facade, high turret towers, dormer windows, intricately carved stonework, a lobby floor made of marble, and a signature steep-pitched copper roof. Charles Melville Hayes demanded only the best, and he spared no expense in the name of luxury, and after almost 3 years and $2 million in the hotel, and an additional $800,000 on the station, both were eyeing completion, and the grand opening would be an extravagant affair slated for April 26th of 1912. And Hayes insisted that the hotel be named after the Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. Laurier's dream was to turn Ottawa into Washington of the North, as he called it, and he believed that Hayes' risk-taking nature would help him accomplish that goal, and his government provided millions in loans and subsidies to the Grand Trunk Pacific to complete their route, And at this point, they were probably the biggest reason they were able to stay afloat financially, so when it came to naming the hotel after the Prime Minister, Hayes would not take no for an answer. Early April of 1912 saw Hayes in Europe to secure more funding from investors to complete his vision, as well as bring back the furniture order for the Chateau Laurier. I mean, this guy was stopping at nothing to beat the Canadian Pacific, including picking up his own furniture order from across the pond. And Hayes was also attempting to secure a deal with the White Star Line to have them bring passengers across the Atlantic and exclusively on the Grand Trunk Pacific passenger trains en route to the Pacific and Prince Rupert, since Canadian Pacific already had their own fleet of steamships and he didn't. Hayes' return to Canada was last minute, but he would board first class aboard White Star Line's finest vessel to date, the RMS Titanic. And while his wife and daughter would survive the sinking that night, at 2 a.m. on April 15, 1912, Hayes and his secretary plunged into the icy North Atlantic waters, perishing, and 2 weeks later, the grand opening was replaced with his funeral, and at 11:30 a.m., all Grand Trunk Pacific passenger trains slowed to a halt for 5 minutes and a moment of silence and respect to honor their leader and visionary, who never saw his transcontinental route completed or a single railway hotel. Now, the Chateau Laurier would open its doors 2 months later on June 12th of 1912 without any ceremony, and rooms would fetch a moderate $2 a night per room, which was pretty reasonable at the time. And although he had passed, Hayes' vision was a success, and the chateau from the start was seen as a masterpiece by the locals. And Grand Trunk Pacific would continue to forge west, opening the Fort Garry in my birthplace in Winnipeg in December of 1913, and the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton 2 summers later in July of 1915, both of which I've done separate videos on in this series. And Grand Trunk Pacific didn't stop there, as they also had plans for the Chateau Coupelle in Regina, Chateau Maida Hot Springs in Jasper, Chateau Mount Robson, Chateau Prince George, and the Chateau Prince Rupert. They would break ground on all of them by 1913, but that's as far as they would get, because when World War I broke out shortly after that, in hopes to complete just one of the remaining 5 hotels, they would halt construction on all of them except for the Hotel Macdonald in Edmonton. The rest would never see any more progress than the steel girders going up in Regina at the Chateau Coupelle. Back in Ottawa, the Chateau Laurier was their flagship hotel, but 1919 saw the Grand Trunk Pacific default on all their repayments to the Canadian government, and in 1923 they were absorbed into the newly formed, government-operated Canadian National Railways, now making the Chateau Laurier a Canadian national hotel. And out of World War I, CN's focus was reviving passenger service. For them, that included constructing the Jasper Park Lodge in the Northern Rockies, which I covered in an earlier episode, as well as an expansion here in Ottawa on the Chateau Laurier. And the hotel was sold out more often than not, and CN would actually have to place passengers in sleeping cars on the tracks of Ottawa Union Station to meet demand. And new President Henry Thornton believed that an expansion was absolutely essential. So on March 10th, 1927, they would break ground on a new $6 million, 240-room addition to expand the hotel from its original letter L-shaped design to what they called a U-shape, but from above it looks more like a crooked U. So, I don't know, maybe somebody forgot to measure. The addition was complete in 1929, and since the original wing's copper roof had already oxidized, workers were actually instructed by the CN president himself to urinate on the new copper in an attempt to make the expansion oxidize faster and try to make it blend seamlessly with the old wing. And safe to say, it did not work. But the Chateau did unveil an Art Deco swimming pool in 1930, which still to this day remains Ottawa's largest and deepest hotel pool, and it was a big draw from passengers arriving by train in Ottawa. Second class and steerage would be dropped off on the station tracks, with first class arriving alongside the Chateau Laurier under today's terrace, as you see below, until 1966. Now you'll notice how black and dirty the facade of the hotel became. Well, when a steam locomotive moved, it needed the most amount of power to get moving at the start, and that meant the most amount of soot and steam was produced when they fired up outside the Chateau Laurier, and therefore staining the hotel's limestone stonework. And after decades of service, it led the city officials to begin the process of removing all trains from the city's downtown core. And although this plan started in 1950, and only 5 years later, the railways had essentially exiled the steam locomotive in favor of the more efficient diesels, passenger service was about as profitable as hauling cattle for the railways, which is also why they would refer to passenger service as cattle service. And 1966 would see the completion of a new station outside the city, and in June of that year, the final passenger train would depart Ottawa Union Station, with plans for demolition shortly after. And this removal of passenger service would kickstart Saskatoon to follow suit the following year, Winnipeg and Vancouver in 1980, with Toronto and Edmonton finally following suit in the 1990s. And once passenger service had dissolved, the Chateau would begin to shift focus to sustaining itself as an independent hotel, They'd operate under Canadian National Hotels until 1988, when the Canadian Pacific would purchase all of CN's remaining hotels. And 1 decade later, in 1999, CP would purchase Fairmont Hotels and rebrand all their hotels as Fairmont, now making the Chateau Laurier the Fairmont Chateau Laurier. And a quarter century later, that brings us to today, in 2025, for my experience inside Ottawa's castle. Now, this day actually starts in Montreal, where we had just traveled across Canada from Vancouver, through the Canadian Rockies, into the prairies, arriving in downtown Toronto and into Montreal by train, where we would pop out of Montreal Central Station and spend 4 nights inside Canada's last Grand Railway Hotel, the Chateau Champlain, better known as a cheese grater for its distinctive design. And 4 days later, after checking out, we would walk through the underground city back into Montreal Central Station, and after a few Americanos too many in the business lounge, we would board our train, watch the Montreal skyline fade into the distance, and 2 hours later, we would arrive into the nation's capital at Ottawa Station. And after a short 15-minute Uber ride into downtown, we would arrive at the Chateau Laurier, head inside, through the stunning grand lobby, up to the 4th floor for the Fairmont Gold check-in, where this would be our fixed address for the next 3 nights. Decent. Not bad at all. All right. Ooh. Oh, wow. Look at that picture.
The pictures of chocolate.
This is chocolate?
Yeah.
Can you eat it?
Yeah.
I love a little train track, too.
So cute.
If this is the first episode in this series that you're tuning into, first off, welcome, but also this trip is for Bella's birthday, and I gotta tip my hat to the Chateau Laurier team, because of all the railway hotels that we have stayed at so far, this surprise chocolate postcard package definitely takes the taco for being the most impressive. And the Chateau herself, in a word, absolutely breathtaking. From the bust of Sir Wilfrid Laurier at the entrance of the hotel, which he absolutely despised, by the way, to the grand hallways, no shortage of beautiful chandeliers lining the ceilings, the jaw-dropping ballrooms, all of which absolutely steeped in Canadian history, including the only piece of the original furniture order that survived the Titanic sinking, because it arrived 5 minutes late for loading and was shipped on the next ocean liner, and the Titanic connection actually runs deeper than that. The Chateau Laurier was the brainchild of Charles Melville Hayes, a man who, much like myself, was absolutely fascinated with the Titanic. And remember that deal that I mentioned earlier that he was trying to lock in with the White Star Line? Well, he saw the Titanic and her sister ship, the Olympic, early, and when he saw them, he immediately put that inspiration to use inside the walls of the Chateau Laurier. And although some say his spirit still lingers here, perhaps waiting for the lost furniture delivery, it's worth noting I've stayed at quite a few of Canada's railway hotels to date, from the Jasper Park Lodge that really seem to hide their railway history at every opportunity, to the Best Borough in Saskatoon that put it on full display. And as a self-proclaimed train and history nerd myself, I appreciate how much pride the Chateau Laurier has in its railway history, putting on full display here as well. Now, across the street from the Chateau stands the former Union Station, and after the final passenger train departed in 1966, the city had plans to demolish this stunning building the following year, but thankfully, due to public outcry, they saved the building when the federal government halted the demolition and opted to turn it into a new Senate building. And considering that there is a current 40-year construction renovation project to fix the current Parliament building, including adding a nuclear-proof bunker, Union Station is going to be busy for the next little while. But they do also offer tours of the station for free, but I don't think that the video does it justice, because what an experience it must have been to wait in the great station for your train, and whether it was a train for a new life over the prairies, or heading overseas for the brave men that said goodbye to their loved ones in this very station to fight for our country in World War I and World War II, many of which never ended up getting a return ticket. And there's actually a really beautiful statue outside the station at the National War Memorial that pays tribute to those men that paid the ultimate price for our freedoms in both world wars, and to them, thank you. And the original station benches that you actually see here, they actually reside today in Montreal at the Expo Rail Museum, which, if you're a train nerd, I can't recommend enough. Now, later that night, Belle and I made our way down for dinner at the newly renovated Zoe's restaurant, and this place is absolutely stunning. And the restaurant itself is actually the original restaurant from 1912, but we opted for the lounge portion tonight, which was actually a part of the 1927 expansion, specifically on the outdoor terrace, which you can see in this photo. Bella started with the chestnut and celeriac soup with brown butter and creme fraiche, while I went for the smoked lobster tail salad. And the presentation alone was mesmerizing, this glass dome lifting to reveal the dish in a cloud of smoke, and overall really well composed, and Bella's soup was pretty exceptional as well. For mains, Bella opted for the seared tuna. I myself ordered the beef short rib featuring palm puree, chestnut mushrooms, and black truffle demi-glaze. Now listen, I've been a little bit of a harsh food critic at some of the other hotels in the series, so when I say that this short rib was the greatest dish I've ever had in my life, I'm not exaggerating. The potato puree was incredible. The demi-glaze was so good. I mean, I literally could have filled up my loafer and drank it later that night if they gave me that option. And the short rib itself, melt in your mouth, great color. Even Bella, who by all means is a pescatarian, snuck a bite out of my red meat and said that she would be ordering it the next time we sat down for dinner. I mean, this dish was incredible. And pair it with an Americano and their new salted caramel macchiato cream for dessert, which we absolutely devoured. This meal was not just perfectly executed, but a standard that I hope any restaurant sees and tries to live up to. And my curiosity led me to try to track down the man that was behind all this, and this is Chef David, who graciously took me behind the scenes for a glimpse into his day-to-day from the original 1912 loading dock that was actually designed to receive food orders via horse and buggy, to a century-old walk-in cooler still in use today, and a dishwasher capable of tackling 10,000 plates an hour, which, trust me, Chef was super excited to show this off to me, including a pastry kitchen where Chef Jin is meticulously crafting scratch-made scones, ice cream, and even croissants. If a hotel is making their own croissants, you know they love what they do, and considering that Chef is doing over 1,000 miles a day and close to 50,000 in peak months, it's seriously impressive what they're doing here. And Chef is even offering cooking classes that include dinner and dessert with it, and it makes for a great date night because the following night, Belle and I went for one. Chef was teaching how to make his Asian pear and red apple salad with house-made ricotta cheese, and after you make your starters, Chef makes your mains and dessert. And listen, whether you're visiting Ottawa looking for a great meal or a local looking for a great date night, the Chateau Laurier is an absolute must experience. And something I can also get behind is today's video sponsor, Seed. Seed is a clinically validated 2-in-1 prebiotic and probiotic that supports your gut health, digestive health, skin health, immune health, and your heart health. I spent my entire life traveling for hockey and now for the series, so when my mom, of all people, told me about how Seed could help with bloating and digestive relief, it was an absolute no-brainer. I mean, my mom is truly the ultimate influencer in my life. Seed's DSO1 symbiotic delivers 20 times the live probiotic bacteria compared to your leading greens powder and is formulated to provide relief from everyday digestive discomforts weighing you down, such as gas and bloating, reduce intermittent constipation after just 2 weeks, and improve gastrointestinal barrier function in just 3 months by helping your body to absorb the good nutrients and keep the toxins away. What more can you ask for? And when I started using Seed, I found I was having significantly less upset stomachs after eating, less bloating, and the overall health of my skin and my beard and my hair, I found went up. And if you are for some reason still on the fence and undecided about Seed, we are teaming up. We are going to get you 25% off your first month. When you go to the link in the video description, you click that link and you use the code TRAV25, that is my name, TRAV25, for 25% off Seed's DSO1 Symbiotic. And what are you waiting for? Get started today. And thank you so much to Seed for sponsoring this video and making this series possible. The next morning, I headed downstairs to Cafe Laurier, which is the hotel's new coffee shop, home to great espresso, those same scratch-made croissants that I referenced earlier in the video, and when you can sip on an Americano and get that morning caffeine fix alongside a legend himself with some great hotel archives, I don't know if you can find a better spot in the city to have your morning cup of joe than Cafe Laurier. That is, of course, if you actually had a good night's sleep, and as I alluded to earlier, you can't talk about the railway hotels of Canada without talking about whether or not they're haunted. And let's be honest, they're all haunted to some degree, but some of the stories are a little bit too fiction for me personally, from the red dress lady that haunts the Hotel Vancouver, to the best burl that's haunted by a waiter that threw a man down 5 flights of stairs. They just all seem a little bit unrealistic to me personally, but when I heard that it was the ghost of Charles Melville Hayes that occupies the Chateau Laurier, it made total sense. His Titanic obsession is etched in the hotel's design, and like I mentioned earlier, it's rumored that he's still here waiting for that ill-fated furniture delivery. Let me know in the comment section if you think that the hotel is haunted or not. I'm curious to read them down below. Now, who better to separate the fact from fiction than a man that's been working here longer than I've been alive? And I mean, he even worked here when it was a Canadian Pacific hotel, and that man is Bruno. He was able to give me a tour of the hotel from the old CBC headquarters where they used to run CN Radio to the rooftop, which really provides a great appreciation for the chateau-style construction, and even the hotel's pigeons love the hotel, especially with the pool exhaust coming out on this cold -20 winter day. You also get a great view of the Ottawa River and the Alexandra Bridge, which, although the city is planning to demolish it soon, it was built between 1898 and 1900 by the Canadian Pacific, and named in honor of the Queen, the Alexandra of Denmark, during her visit to Ottawa. And when the Canadian Pacific debuted their new passenger train, the Canadian, in the spring of 1955, she would depart daily out of Ottawa Union Station, running alongside the Chateau Laurier before crossing the Ottawa River over the Alexandra Bridge, before heading west over the prairies, through the Rockies into Banff, and finally arriving on the Pacific in Vancouver 3.5 days later. But when they cut passenger service in 1966, that was the final time the Alexandra Bridge saw a passenger train, where today, it's primarily a vehicle and footbridge. The roof also has a great perspective of Parliament Hill, and you can bet that I was able to convince Bruno to give me a tour of the Prime Minister's suite, but more importantly the Hayes Suite, named after this guy, and the same suite that countless US presidents have stayed in over the years. These suites are head to toe decked in art and craftsmanship, and the Hayes Suite specifically was modeled identical to the parlor suite he would have stayed in on board the Titanic. I mean, this man's obsession with the world's greatest ocean liner ran seriously deep. But Bruno himself is actually pretty famous as well. He recently helped recover the stolen Roaring Lion portrait of Winston Churchill a few years ago that the hotel recently got back, where the culprits swapped out the original with a fake, fooling everybody until Bruno noticed the forgery. But as I mentioned, the real portrait has since been recovered, the rest still an ongoing legal investigation. And although Bruno is pretty famous locally, if you ask those locals, they'll say the only person more famous than him is Stuart, the official hotel dog, which, to be honest with you, if you have seen any of the previous episodes in the series, kind of makes me wish that we brought Wally on this trip, but don't worry, he'll make a return in the future. Later that day, we would head down to the Rideau Canal, and listen, I'm born in Winnipeg, so when I found out that it was a beautiful -20 day in Ottawa, with almost no wind, I was absolutely tickled pink to skate on the world's famous Rideau Canal. And when Belle and I stumbled upon this ice tricycle, I mean, come on, this was an absolute no-brainer to do. And while I got an absolute workout chugging down the canal, Bella was enjoying the scenery of the chateau, the canal, and Confederation Park above us, at least until I got tired and we had to turn back. Oh.
You know what time it is.
Cannonball!
After that, we would head back to the hotel and grab some lunch, where Bella would get the red apple and pear salad. I got the French onion soup, an absolute staple on a good lunch menu, including the chocolate mousse that we got to celebrate her birthday, and all, of course, were absolutely fantastic. But earlier in the afternoon, I picked up a few postcards that they sell inside the cafe, because the hotel still operates daily mail service here. And although from 1960 onward, passenger service was pretty much unprofitable, the railways were still Canada's major mail carrier, and it was really the only thing keeping private passenger service afloat until they lost the contract in 1972, where 6 years later they would dissolve all passenger service into what we now know today as Via Rail Canada. But Royal Mail is still alive and well here at the Chateau, so I wrote back to my mom in Winnipeg to let her know how much she means to me first off, and also how excited I am to take her to Quebec's castle at the Chateau Frontenac in a few weeks for some quality mother-son time, which is much overdue. But whether you're traveling across Canada by train, staying at one of Canada's Grand Railway hotels, or just writing a postcard from the hotel to somebody you love, this entire experience is an absolute time machine. So after 3 nights, we would check out of the hotel, out of downtown Ottawa, into the Ottawa airport, back home. And at the end of the day, this is just another stop in my series across Canada to stay at as many of the Grand Railway hotels as possible, but the Chateau Laurier is special. And if Charles Melville Hayes were alive today, he'd probably be absolutely appalled with what is happening with the current state of Canadian passenger service. But inside the Chateau Laurier, I believe he would be beyond delighted to see what they've done today, from Chef David and his team producing the best dining experience I've had to date, to some great date ideas, including one of the British's most well-known traditions, afternoon tea, the cooking class that Chef offers, the endless outdoor activities along the canal, the staff that make this place feel like a family-owned and operated hotel with friendly service and luxury on offer here inside the Fairmont Gold Lounge. The Chateau Laurier is more than just a hotel, it is a portal to the past, and if you're in Ottawa, don't just admire the castle from the outside, come and experience an integral portion of Canadian history from within. This series is my love letter to Canada and the railways that built it. From downtown Montreal to the west coast in Vancouver, from my birthplace in the prairies of Winnipeg to the Rockies in Banff, I'm traveling across Canada, rewinding the clock to share the stories of over a century ago before they're forgotten forever, along with some hidden gems nestled along the way. So, have you ever stayed here? Do you have a Chateau Laurier story to share below? Whatever it is, leave a comment below because I'd love to hear it. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode in the series. Thank you so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you again in the next episode of the Grand Railway Hotels of Canada series. I'll see you then.